There is a very specific kind of confusion that lives in the aftermath of a breakup, and it doesn't belong to the women who are clearly devastated or clearly over it. It belongs to the women in the middle, the ones who did the work, rebuilt their lives, genuinely moved forward, and then started noticing things, small things, behavioral things, the reach out that had no real reason behind it, the social media activity that was slightly too consistent to be accidental, the mutual friend who mentioned casually that he'd been asking about her, the way he behaved the last time they were in the same space, slightly off, slightly too aware of her presence, slightly too much effort being made by someone who supposedly moved on. And now she's doing the thing women do when they notice things. She's analyzing, trying to figure out if what she's seeing is real or if she's pattern matching her way into a story she wants to be true. Because wanting it to be true is the trap. The moment she wants him to regret losing her, her interpretation of his behavior becomes unreliable. Everything looks like a sign when you're looking for signs, and nothing gets correctly evaluated when the evaluation is compromised by hope. This video exists to cut through that, to give clear, specific, psychology-backed behavioral markers of genuine male regret, so she can look at what's actually happening instead of what she hopes is happening. Because there is a difference between a man who genuinely regrets losing her and a man who is bored, ego bruised, or simply unwilling to fully close a door he's not sure he wants shut. 1. He finds reasons to stay in your orbit. A man who has genuinely moved on from a relationship does something that is remarkably easy to overlook precisely because of how undramatic it is. He actually moves on. He doesn't manufacture reasons to stay connected. He doesn't engineer situations that keep him peripherally present in her world. He doesn't show up in the comment section of a post that he would have had no organic reason to engage with. He simply, quietly exits the shared space the relationship occupied and builds his life in a different direction. The exit isn't always clean or immediate, but the trajectory is clear. He is moving away, not hovering at the edges, looking for reasons to stay visible. A man who regrets losing her does the opposite, and the behavior is specific enough to identify clearly once the pattern gets named. The hovering takes different forms depending on the man and the specific dynamic of the relationship. For some men, it looks like the consistent, low-level social media engagement that has no obvious purpose. Not a direct message, not a substantive comment, just a persistent presence in her digital periphery that communicates awareness without committing to contact. The like on a photo at 11 p.m., the view on a story that was posted 6 hours ago, the engagement that is just enough to register and not enough to be confronted directly. His digital footprint keeps reappearing in her space with a consistency that accidental attention doesn't produce. For other men, it looks like the manufactured practical connection, the reason to text that is technically legitimate but clearly constructed, the item he needs to return that he's been holding on to for 4 months, the question about something she mentioned once that he could easily find the answer to elsewhere. The check-in disguised as concern that arrives at a frequency no genuinely indifferent person sustains. Each individual reach out has a surface-level justification. The pattern underneath them has only one honest explanation. Male psychology around post-breakup proximity is specific and well documented. Research on attachment behavior following relationship dissolution shows that men experiencing genuine regret demonstrate significantly higher rates of what psychologists call proximity-maintaining behaviors. Actions designed to keep them connected to or aware of a former partner without requiring the vulnerability of direct emotional disclosure. The behavior exists in the space between wanting her back and being unwilling or unready to say so directly. It is a man trying to keep a door from fully closing while lacking the emotional courage to walk back through it openly. The critical distinction that separates regret-driven orbit hovering from other post-breakup contact patterns is the consistency and the purposelessness of it. A man who reaches out once, gets a response, and then disappears is managing loneliness or ego. He got what he needed, and the impulse was satisfied. A man who maintains a persistent, low-level presence over an extended period, without the contact ever escalating into something substantive, without any clear objective being served by the continued engagement, is not managing a temporary impulse. He is managing an ongoing internal state that the proximity partially, temporarily relieves. The ego maintenance version of this behavior looks superficially similar, but has a different texture on closer examination. A man keeping contact purely for ego reasons tends to engage more when she seems to be thriving and pull back when she seems unavailable. His engagement is reactive, calibrated to her signals, designed to maintain her awareness of him rather than driven by his internal state about her. The regret version tends to be more consistent and less responsive to her signals. It continues even when she's clearly unresponsive, even when the engagement produces nothing encouraging, because it isn't really about getting a response. It's about a man who hasn't found a way to fully let go, doing the only thing that feels manageable, staying close enough to feel like the door is still technically open. She doesn't need to do anything with this information immediately, but she needs to see it accurately, because a man who regrets losing her and expresses it through persistent orbit hovering rather than direct honesty is showing her something important about where he is emotionally. He feels the loss. He hasn't yet decided what to do with it, and the hovering is the behavioral evidence of that unresolved internal conflict playing out in the only way his emotional vocabulary currently allows. 2. His reach-outs have no logical agenda. There is a version of post-breakup contact that is easy to categorize and easy to respond to appropriately. He needs something practical, a belonging returned, a shared account closed, a logistical loose end tied up. The contact has a clear purpose, the purpose gets addressed, and the interaction ends. Nobody needs to read anything into it because there is nothing beneath the surface to read. It is transactional contact, and transactional contact between exes is not a sign of anything except unfinished practical business. Then there is the other kind, the kind that has no logical agenda, the kind that arrives without a request attached, without a practical purpose driving it, without any obvious reason for existing beyond the fact that he thought of her and acted on it before his rational brain could construct a justification for why he shouldn't. A text about something she mentioned liking 6 months ago that he randomly encountered. A voice note that starts with, "This is going to sound random," and then proceeds to be exactly as random as advertised. A meme that is genuinely funny, but could have been sent to literally anyone in his contact list, and somehow ended up in her inbox specifically. Contact that, when examined for purpose, comes up empty, and in that emptiness reveals everything. Purposeless reach out is one of the most reliable behavioral indicators of unresolved emotional attachment in male psychology. And the reason it's so reliable is precisely because it bypasses the rational filtering system that governs most male communication. Men are generally purposeful communicators. They reach out when they need something, want something, or have something specific to convey. The absence of a clear communicative purpose in a reach out means the impulse that generated the contact was not rational. It was emotional. Something triggered a thought of her. The emotional weight of that thought exceeded his resistance threshold, and the message got sent before the part of his brain that manages self-preservation could intervene. Research on post-breakup communication patterns consistently identifies unprompted, low-agenda contact as one of the strongest behavioral predictors of continued romantic attachment. The key variable is not the frequency of contact, but the purposelessness of it, the absence of any practical justification that could explain the reach out as anything other than an emotional impulse breaking through a rational filter. A man who reaches out with a clear agenda is managing a practical reality. A man who reaches out with no agenda is managing an emotional one. And emotional reach outs from men who don't typically lead with emotion are not casual. They are significant. The distinction between a man who misses her specifically and a man who is simply lonely or bored is visible in the content and specificity of the purposeless contact. Loneliness and boredom produce generic reach outs. "Hey, how are you? Been thinking about you." Low effort, low specificity contact that could be sent to multiple people and probably was. Genuine regret produces specific contact, something that references her specifically, recalls something unique to their dynamic, responds to something particular about who she is, rather than just filling a generic companionship void. The difference between "thinking of you" and "I drove past that place you loved and literally couldn't think about anything else for 10 minutes" is not a difference in phrasing. It is a difference in what's driving the contact. Timing matters in ways that add significant information to the pattern. Purposeless reach outs that arrive during moments of obvious personal transition for him, a new job, a milestone, a difficult period, a celebratory moment, reveal something specific about her role in his internal landscape. She is who his brain goes to in significant moments, not as a practical resource, not as a logistics contact, but as the person his emotional system identifies as the appropriate witness to important experiences. That is not the behavior of a man who has fully processed losing her. That is the behavior of a man whose internal attachment system still has her filed under a category he hasn't found a replacement for. What she should avoid doing with this information is responding in a way that satisfies the emotional impulse behind the contact without requiring him to be direct about what the contact actually means. Warm, engaged responses to purposeless reach outs without any acknowledgement of the pattern reward the indirect behavior and remove any pressure on him to be honest about what's driving it. He gets the emotional relief of connection without the vulnerability of admission. And a man who can access emotional relief from her without the vulnerability of admission has very little incentive to ever move toward the direct conversation that would actually clarify where things stand. Purposeless contact from a man who doesn't typically communicate without purpose is not something to romanticize or overanalyze in isolation. It is one data point in a larger pattern, but it is a data point that, when it appears consistently and specifically, is pointing in a very clear direction toward a man whose rational decision to end the relationship and whose emotional reality about having ended it are not, several months later, telling the same story. 3. He monitors your life more than a casual ex. When there is a baseline level of post-breakup awareness that is completely normal and requires no analysis. Mutual social circles mean information travels. Shared platforms mean occasional visibility is unavoidable. Running into each other's lives peripherally through the natural operation of shared networks is not a sign of anything except the fact that two people who were once connected exist in overlapping worlds. Nobody needs to read regret into the occasional incidental awareness that comes with having shared a life with someone, however briefly. What requires analysis is when the awareness stops being incidental and starts being deliberate. When the monitoring is consistent enough, specific enough, and behaviorally visible enough that it cannot be explained by the casual, unavoidable overlap of shared networks. When a man who supposedly moved on demonstrates through specific and repeated behavior that he is paying significantly more attention to her current life than someone who has genuinely moved on would have any practical reason to. The digital signatures of deliberate post-breakup monitoring are specific and worth naming clearly. Watching every single story she posts, not occasionally, not when an interesting thumbnail catches passive attention, but consistently within a narrow time window that suggests active checking rather than passive encountering. Engaging with content from accounts she recently followed or pages she recently interacted with, suggesting he is navigating her digital footprint rather than simply encountering it. Appearing in her profile views with a regularity that passive social media use doesn't produce. These behaviors require intent. They require him to be actively directing his attention toward her digital presence rather than simply stumbling across it in the normal flow of platform use. The in-person version of deliberate monitoring is less common, but more revealing when it occurs, showing up in spaces he has no organic reason to frequent, but that she's known to inhabit, positioning himself where their paths are likely to cross under the cover of coincidence, knowing details about her current activities, schedule, or life development that he could only know if he was actively gathering that information through channels she didn't provide directly. Each individual instance can be rationalized as coincidence. The pattern, examined honestly, does not survive the coincidence explanation. Neurologically, the monitoring behavior is driven by something specific that researchers studying attachment and loss describe as hypervigilant partner tracking, a state that develops in individuals who have lost a significant attachment figure and whose nervous system responds to that loss by increasing monitoring behavior as a form of continued connection. The monitoring is not purely strategic or consciously calculating. It is partly the attachment system doing what attachment systems do when they've lost their primary anchor, seeking proximity through whatever channels remain available. He is not always fully aware of how much attention he is directing toward her. He just knows on some level that tracking her presence makes the loss feel slightly more manageable. The distinction between monitoring driven by regret and monitoring driven by something less healthy, obsession, control, or unresolved anger, is important and worth addressing directly. Regret driven monitoring tends to be passive and non intrusive. He is watching from a distance, gathering information without making his presence felt, staying connected through observation rather than intervention. The watching is wistful rather than resentful. The unhealthy version tends to be intrusive, making his monitoring visible in ways designed to unsettle her, using the information gathered to insert himself inappropriately, or demonstrating awareness of her activities in ways that feel threatening rather than merely telling. What the monitoring reveals, in its regret driven form, is a man who has not completed the internal process of letting her go. The relationship ended in the external world. The practical connection was severed, the daily contact stopped, the shared life dissolved. But in his internal world, she remains significant enough to warrant ongoing attention. His curiosity about her current life is not casual. It is the specific curiosity of someone who wonders regularly whether the story he thought he was finished with is still being written without him, and cannot quite bring himself to stop checking. A woman who recognizes this pattern in a man's behavior has access to information he hasn't voluntarily disclosed and may not even fully acknowledge to himself. He is watching her life from a distance because he cannot bring himself to fully disengage from it. And a man who cannot disengage from a life he chose to leave is not a man who is settled in that choice. He is a man whose regret is doing its quiet, persistent work, visible in every deliberate scroll, every consistent story view, every appearance in spaces she didn't invite him into. The watching tells on him every single time. 4. He brings up the past. Specifically and selectively, there is a version of referencing a shared past that is completely emotionally neutral and means very little in terms of where someone actually stands. A passing mention of something that happened, a general acknowledgement that a shared experience existed, the casual reference to a chapter of life that both people lived through. That version of past referencing is just memory operating normally. Two people who shared time together, occasionally acknowledging that the time was shared. It requires no analysis and reveals nothing significant about unresolved attachment. Then there is the other version, the specific version, the one where he doesn't reference the relationship in general terms, but retrieves a precise, particular memory that requires him to have been carrying it. A specific conversation, a specific moment, a specific detail about who she was or what she said or how she made him feel that he has no practical reason to still have in active memory unless it has been living there, regularly revisited, long after the relationship ended. That version is not memory operating normally. That is attachment operating through memory, and the specificity is what gives it away completely. The psychological mechanism behind selective memory retrieval in men experiencing post-breakup regret is rooted in how the brain processes emotionally significant experiences. Research on memory consolidation and emotional attachment shows that experiences associated with strong positive emotion, particularly those connected to feelings of genuine intimacy, connection, and being deeply known, are encoded with significantly higher retention strength than neutral experiences. A man who is actively missing someone doesn't just miss them in a general abstract sense. He misses specific moments, specific textures of the relationship, specific versions of her that existed in particular contexts. And those specific memories, when they surface in conversation, reveal exactly how much internal space she still occupies. The selectivity is the key diagnostic marker. A man referencing the relationship generally, "We had some good times, it was a good relationship while it lasted," is processing the relationship as a completed chapter. His language is past tense, categorical, and emotionally resolved. But a man who references a specific moment, "I still think about that conversation we had in the car that night. I was thinking about the way you used to do that thing when you were excited about something. I remember you said something about this once, and it was the most accurate thing I'd ever heard," is not processing a completed chapter. He is actively revisiting specific pages, and pages only get revisited when the story they contain still matters to the reader. The inside joke retrieval is particularly revealing. Inside jokes are relationship specific artifacts. They only exist because two particular people shared particular experiences that generated particular references nobody outside the dynamic would understand. A man who retrieves an inside joke months after a relationship ended is demonstrating that he has kept something specifically tied to her, specifically tied to what they were together, active in his mental landscape long past the point where someone who has genuinely moved on would have let it fade. Inside jokes don't survive unless someone is keeping them alive, and keeping them alive requires regularly visiting the mental space where they live. What makes this sign especially significant is the involuntary quality that genuine regret driven memory retrieval tends to carry. A man who brings up a specific memory because he's been thinking about it and it surfaced naturally in conversation has a different energy than a man who references the past strategically to reestablish connection or manufacture nostalgia. The genuine version tends to arrive slightly unguarded. He says it and then catches himself, or he says it with a quality of honesty that strategic deployment doesn't produce. The strategic version has a slightly rehearsed texture, a too convenient timing, a sense of being placed rather than surfacing organically. Selective past referencing also reveals something specific about what he valued most in the relationship. Because people don't retrieve random memories from significant experiences, they retrieve the ones that meant the most. When a man brings up a specific moment, he is inadvertently disclosing what he misses most specifically. The memory he keeps returning to is a map of his regret, pointing directly at the dimension of what they had that he hasn't been able to find a replacement for and isn't entirely sure exists elsewhere. A woman who hears this kind of specific, selective memory retrieval from a man who supposedly moved on is not receiving a casual conversational contribution. She is receiving an involuntary disclosure from a man whose internal landscape is still significantly organized around experiences they shared, experiences he clearly hasn't been able to file away as cleanly as the end of the relationship was supposed to allow. The specific memory surfacing in conversation is not the whole story. It is the part of the story he couldn't keep from telling. 6 signs, all of them specific, all of them rooted in the gap between what a man says and what his behavior, his body, and his indirect language are quietly communicating underneath it. He stays in your orbit without a clear reason. His reach-outs have no logical agenda. He monitors your life more carefully than someone who moved on would bother to. He retrieves specific memories nobody asked him to retrieve. His subsequent relationships behave like unfinished business in disguise. He gathers information about you through everyone except you. His energy changes the moment you're in the same room, and he tells you, in every way except the direct one, that leaving produced consequences he wasn't fully prepared for. None of these signs exist in isolation. One or two could be coincidence, could be ego, could be loneliness wearing the costume of something more significant. But a consistent pattern across multiple categories, behavioral, digital, social, verbal, physiological, is not a coincidence. It is a man whose internal reality about losing her has not caught up with the external decision he made to do it. Here is the part that matters most. And most breakup content never gets honest enough to say it clearly. Knowing he regrets losing you is information. It is not automatically an instruction. Regret without change is just delayed disappointment. A man who regrets losing you but takes no concrete, consistent, accountable steps to demonstrate that the things that caused the loss have actually shifted is a man whose regret is real and whose readiness is not. And only one of those things is actually relevant to what happens next. What you do with this information is entirely yours to decide, but decide from a position of clarity, not from the relief of being wanted, not from the comfort of feeling validated, not from the pull of history mistaken for compatibility. Decide from the position of a woman who knows her value clearly enough that a man's regret, however genuine, has to come attached to genuine change before it qualifies as a reason to reconsider anything. If any of these 8 signs landed close to home today, if this video named something you've been observing but couldn't fully articulate, drop it in the comments. Be specific about what you're seeing and where you are in figuring out what to do with it. This community reads every comment, and many receive personal responses, because navigating this particular kind of situation deserves more than generic advice, and you deserve someone actually engaging with what you're going through. If this gave you clarity today, do something with it. Like it, share it with a woman who is currently trying to decode a man's post breakup behavior. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel. This is the kind of direct, psychology backed relationship content that keeps coming. And every single video is built to give you the tools to see clearly, decide wisely, and move through love with the kind of self possession that makes every outcome survivable.